If I say something to you 3 times, do you think I want you to remember it? Anybody here who's ever been in a relationship with another person you'll look at them some days and you go, "What'd you say?" And they'll look at you and they'll go, "This is my 4th time for saying this," right? If you've ever had children, or you've had grandkids, or you've been responsible for some child somewhere, you know what I'm talking about, right? By the way, if you've ever been married, you know what I'm talking about. Because apparently my memory is not as good as it should be, because there's so many times some people in my family who will go unnamed say things like, "Well, this is the 3rd time I've said this to you." Yeah, you'll claim that, yeah. 3 times. And sometimes it's more than that. And of course, that trait is passed on down through the family, because the children in my family sometimes look at me and go, "Well, Dad, how many times I got to say this to you?" Repeat it again. Repeat it again. Luke chapter 2, verse 7. Luke chapter 2, verse 7, in the Christmas story from Luke's version of it, says, "And she gave birth to her firstborn, a son, and she wrapped him in clothes and placed him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn." And then in Luke chapter 2, verse 12, in the same story, we read these words, "This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in clothes and lying in a manger." And then in verse 16 of the same story, "So they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in the manger." So now, if Luke tells you at least 3 times, you might want to keep an eye on the manger. How many of you are going to look at the manger? Yeah. It's as if it's a detail that he wants you to really remember. And so it is. We've said it already. If I have something to say and I say it 3 times, I really want you to remember it. And it's as if he wants to remind you there's a manger involved in the story. And you need to think about the manger. Now, let's understand something about the manger. The manger was not a cozy, comfy baby carrier. I went into a store this week to do something I have not done in many, many years. I walked through a store and started checking out all of the little baby carriers. Y'all, are y'all kidding me? The pockets and the padding and the safety features and the cozy and these things are like fortresses. Y'all remember the good old days when you laid them in a flat thing, put a blanket on top of them, and then buckled them in the back seat and just went on about your business? You could drop a baby in one of these things and they'll come out of it fine. They're like a fortress. And they're, I saw the prices on them, and I was like, I don't want to have a baby. They're unbelievable. How many of you, the most important thing I ever purchased was that little bubble stroller, the little fold together thing. Jovia rode in that till she was 12. Those were the greatest things ever made. Forget these $300 baby carriers. Are you kidding me? And they got logos and designer wear, like the baby even knows. Look, the manger wasn't any of that thing. It wasn't any. Guys, it was a feeding trough, for crying out loud. It was a crudely constructed piece of farm equipment, is what it was. And the interesting thing about it, Bill Hybels was right. Apart from the Christmas story, most Westerners wouldn't even know what a manger was. The only reason we do is because we've read the story. And it's not a word. I am almost 100% sure nobody has used the word manger in a sentence this past year. because we don't call it a manger. Just the story calls it a manger. But yet, Jesus slept his first night in a feeding trough. By the way, does anybody here remember the first night they brought the baby home to your house? If you have children, grandchildren, if you've had a child staying at your house, guys, I don't know about y'all. Full disclosure, I brought home 3 of them and I was terrified. Was terrified. And not only that, but do you guys realize the care and the preparation and everything that went into just getting this child home? And you literally would lay down after that child finally got into the crib the first time, and you just like hold your breath waiting for him to scream. The care was unbelievable. And yet, here we are with the most amazing birth in the history of the world, and the kid's in a feeding trough. I mean, that's kind of, y'all feel free to, be mildly, it's funny, kind of. But at the same time, now, look, we understand that through the trough, clearly, it's saying something about the humility of Jesus, that the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords would sleep in a feeding trough. We know that. We've talked about that so many years. In fact, I want to show you a passage of Scripture from Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. And I want to read it to you out of the Message to kind of prep you for what else we're going to talk about. Think of yourselves the way Christ Jesus thought of himself. He had equal status with God, but he didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of that status no matter what. Not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of deity and took on the status of a slave and became human. Having become human, he stayed human. It was an incredibly humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life and then died a selfless, obedient death, and the worst kind of death at that, a crucifixion. And so I want you to understand, from the moment Jesus came into the world as a baby, it was a completely humbling process. Which is why we know the manger is so important, because that's about as humble as you can get, isn't it? For a start, to be in a feeding trough. But Luke reminds us that the trough is really, really important. He reminds us that it's so important that he talks about it 3 separate times, as if he wanted your attention and needs you to think a little bit more about it. And so here's what I'd like to suggest to you. The manger is not just a sign to the shepherds, it's actually a sign to you. And so you need to look a little closer at this thing and look a little closer and think a little bit more about it. Now, I want to share something with you. I have read this story all my life. I have preached on this story for nearly 35 or 40 years. And I have preached about it a whole lot. And the really cool thing about Scripture is I saw something this week that I have never seen out of it. And thank goodness for Adam Hamilton, because Adam Hamilton helped me see it. And it's such a simple thing that I think it was so simple I just overlooked it. But I didn't know anything about it. And so here's what I need to say to you. I'm going to tell you what it is in just a second. And if you've already thought about this and already seen it, just don't look at me, duh. Just go, wow, what story was he reading? But keep it to yourself. Because there's something in a story I want you to see. See, I'd never thought it before, and I'd never really ever seen it, but Adam Hamilton helped me understand it. And the simple point is this. Jesus slept where animals eat. That's the point. Jesus slept where animals eat. Now, if you've already thought that, thank God that you have, because I hope you've drawn what you've drawn out of it, what you need to draw out of it. See, for the longest time, I used to look at the manger and I go, wow, what humility. Even as a baby, there was humility in Jesus' life. But I started looking a little bit closer, and I discovered this is the place where Jesus ate his first meal, if you will. This is the place where he was at, as Mary maybe nursed him and then laid him back in a place where animals eat. Okay? So, the manger is trying to tell us something that's so important, and so we need to figure this out. And so I need to take you on a quick tour of this business of eating in Scripture and hopefully show you something. If you're really tired, I need for you to perk up, because I got something I want to show you, because I think once we've taken the trip, it'll be worth it for you. We're going to start by showing you an obscure passage in the book of Deuteronomy where Moses is talking to the children of Israel, and he's laying down how everything should go with them. And here's what he says in Deuteronomy 8:3. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your fathers had known. And he did that to teach you that a man does not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. And you guys have heard the expression, right? Man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the Lord's mouth, right? Now, it's so important that later on, when Jesus is being tempted by Satan in Matthew 4, you'll remember Satan looks at him and says, hey, see those stones? Turn them into bread, right? Because he was hungry. And in Matthew 4, verse 4, Jesus answered and says to him, it's written. And so he quotes Deuteronomy, doesn't he? He said, it's written, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. And so what Deuteronomy and what Jesus were saying is this: there is something deeper than the food you eat. There's something deeper than what you are hungry for. There's something so much deeper. And of course, Jesus would say that deeper thing is everything that comes out of God's mouth. Those words that he speaks. Now, as if that's not enough, Isaiah decides to get in on the show. Isaiah 55. And Isaiah tells us this: why spend money on what is not bread? Okay? And you labor on what does not satisfy. Listen to me, and eat what's good, and your soul will delight in the richest of fare. Here's what Isaiah is saying. Look, there's something deeper to life than what you eat and what you spend your money on. There's something deeper. And by the way, we humans spend money on a lot of things, don't we? Hey, how many of you have ever spent money on trying to be happy? If y'all don't think people spend money on trying to be happy, then explain to me the plastic surgery industry. Yeah. Explain to me the plastic surgery piece. It's why somebody who has a 2016 truck trades for a 2017. It's why somebody who has a 4,000 square foot house decides that a 4,500 square foot house is a little better. It's why somebody who owns one giant boat needs a bigger boat, right? You know, you guys know that we humans, we spend money and we work really hard for things, but here's what Isaiah is saying. Look, ultimately those things won't satisfy you. There's something deeper. There's something deeper in your life, beyond food and beyond the things that we purchase. Okay, by the way, does anybody know what the word Bethlehem, you know what it means? Y'all remember? Say it, come on. House of bread. So I'm hoping at this point maybe your brain is starting to get a little energized here, because understand something. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in a feeding trough, and the place Bethlehem is called House of Bread. Okay? Now, when Jesus grows up, Jesus makes a statement that just ties it all together, and it's found in John 6, and I want you to see it really quick. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, from now on, give us this bread. Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. I'm the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry. And he who believes in me will never be thirsty. And so what happens is Jesus, after all this bread business and hunger and all this stuff, Jesus looks and he says, look, I and I alone can satisfy the deepest longings in your heart. I'm the bread of life. I'm the bread of life. And so on the first night, he slept in a trough where God's creatures eat. God was trying to get your attention really quick, wasn't he, with this manger business? Something about eating and eating and eating, and then Jesus comes along, he says, well, I'll tell you what you do. If you'll just put me into your life, you'll never be hungry. If you'll put me into your life, you'll never be thirsty, because I promise you, I'll satisfy you. Which, of course, means something really important, and that is this. What you're really hungering for will not be found under the Christmas tree this year. You guys know that? Do you guys know that I don't care what's underneath the tree? By the way, I saw the commercial this week where the guy runs out and throws the keys to the new Mercedes to the guy at Christmas. Guess what? A Mercedes won't satisfy you. A Mercedes won't do for you what needs to happen on the inside of you. You won't find it underneath the Christmas tree. By the way, too, if you go and work hard this year, you won't find it at work either. I don't care how hard you work, and you won't find it at work. You won't even find it if you're successful, because success begets success, but guess what? Success requires success. Because once you've been successful a little bit, they expect you to be successful after that. And it's never enough. You'll also never find happiness and a great sense of well-being by running from one relationship to another relationship. You won't do it. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because I'm going to tell you what it does. It actually takes away from you more than putting into you. You won't find it in high adrenaline rushes. You won't find it in new experiences. You won't find it in drugs. You won't find it in entertainment. And you certainly won't find it in the bottom of a bottle. It's not there. See, it's only in Jesus. It's only in Jesus. He says, because look, whoever comes to me never goes hungry. And whoever believes in me is never thirsty. Because I satisfy the deepest longings of the heart. And the interesting thing about it is there's so many things in life that are going to disappoint you. I don't think it's any secret I enjoy Max Lucado's stories. I think I've shared that with you probably 1,000 times. And but there's one of his stories that I have always remembered because it speaks to me. And maybe you remember the story, but turns out he grew up in a West Texas town, and he had a buddy of his call him one day and said, hey, just want to let you know, he said, I saw your mother's name in the newspaper. She's got some unclaimed property here in the town. You know, they're obligated to announce that they owe stuff to people. City Hall's posted it. Your mom's name's in the list, which was really surprising to Max Lucado because his father had already died, and they had moved his mother to live with his sister in Arkansas, and they had sold her house. So as far as they knew, everything was settled up and the estate was all done. But here was his buddy calling him saying, look, apparently your folks own some more stuff, and they want to give it to you. So Max Lucado, which is, and I'll read some of his things, he said, just send me the contact information to his buddy. And his buddy said, okay, I'll email it to you. So that was Sunday afternoon. He didn't get the email until Tuesday. So he said, I had 48 hours to think about what my family actually had that I wasn't aware of. And I naturally decided they were really, really rich. And he said, and here's his quotes because they're rich. First of all, I realized that my parents had grown up in the Great Depression, and I realized that my parents were penny pinchers. They did to dollars what boa constrictors will do to a rat, squeeze the life out of them. Then again, my dad had worked as an oil field mechanic and a wildcatter from time to time. Maybe he took a few of the dollars and hid it from my mother and invested it in an oil well, and now they found oil, black gold, and I'm filthy rich. He said, my imagination raced like a Formula One driver. This could be big. And so he said, by Sunday afternoon, I had paid for my grandchild's education. The only problem was his grandchild wasn't even born yet. And he said, by late Sunday night, well, I had already solved the AIDS crisis. And by Tuesday morning, I had fed the entire world. He said, fortunately for me, though, he said, I received the email, and so I picked up the phone, and I called, and he said, the lady answered the phone, and he said, this is Max Lucado, and she said, oh, I knew your mother. I have something for your mother. And she said, I have a check for him. And at that point, he said, my hands started trembling over the phone. She said, I can't remember everything that was on the check. She goes, I remember some of the numbers, a 3 and a 5. And he said, I got ecstatic then. He said, $35 million. He's like, no, that's crazy. Dad didn't make that kind of money. He says, $35,000. I'll be able to pay for my kids' education with $35,000. And so she said, well, where do you want me to send a check? And he gave her the address. And she kept fiddling, and she couldn't find it, and he was getting more impatient. And then finally she found it, and the ending was less than monumental. She said, here it is. She said, we owe your mom $3.50. She overpaid on her last water bill. What do you want me to do with the check? His first inclination was to say, why don't you keep it? But he said, just send it to my address. He thanked her for her time, hung up the phone. And then that's when he said, I sat at my desk and I reflected and I thought to myself, most of the things we hope for in life really disappoint us. Most of the things. Things that we're counting on to really make a difference in our future. Things that we're counting on to be the game changer in our lives. So often, they disappoint us. But he said, I realized right then and I realize right now that Jesus never disappoints, does he? He just doesn't do it. And all of the expectations and everything I ever hoped for were met in Jesus. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the house of bread, wasn't he? In the house of bread. Born in a feeding stable. And I got to tell you guys something. There's not a person here who doesn't want meaning in their life. And there's not a person here who doesn't want to be hopeful when everything around you is in chaos and in despair. There's not a person here that doesn't want joy in the journey, way beyond happiness. And there's not a person here that doesn't want to know that they can be forgiven so they don't have to live a lifetime of regret. Because, by the way, Christmas is a great time of the year where everybody stops and takes stock of things. And you know what mountain they build really high at Christmas? The mountain of regret. I wish I hadn't have done that this year. I wished I had said this. I wished I had gone there. I wished I hadn't done that. See, most everybody I've ever met wants hope and peace in their lives, and they really want it on the day they have to go to the cemetery. They really, really want it. But I want to say this to you. All this and so much more comes from Jesus. A baby born in a stable in Bethlehem, the house of bread, who was laid in a feeding trough where the animals ate, who was visited by the shepherds, who was honored by the magi, who is the bread of life, who satisfies the deepest longings of your heart. And so 3 times he says to you, whatever you do, keep your eye on the manger. Which is why I say to you today, keep your eye on the manger. And I tell you, come to the manger and eat the bread and never be hungry again. And now you know why we always say, and on our best days, we're one beggar telling the other beggar where to find the bread. Right? The bread of life, Jesus Christ. John would start his gospel with these words, and this is the truest thing it's said in all the gospels. But to all who believed in him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. They are reborn. This is not a physical birth resulting from human passion or plan. This rebirth comes from God. To everyone who believed in him and accepted them, he gave the right to become the children of God. But I'll say this to you. You'll never make it unless you get to the manger, to the feeding trough, where the bread of life slept his first night.